No, not now.
That sounds like it's gonna cost you.
I know what to do. I'm going to CashNetUSA.com. I can apply in minutes, get an instant decision, and if approved, I could have the money in my account as soon as the same business day.
When you need money fast, be the hero. Go to CashNetUSA.com to apply for the money you need now. The exact timing as to when your loan funds will be available will be determined by your banking institution.
Spring it on with 40 to 70% off almost everything at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com. Matching styles for the family are on sale too. Shop it all through April 12th.
Welcome to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Dan, we talked about it on Monday. It's now post-draft time. The dust is settled. All the anxiety is pretty much gone. We got our 9 guys. Now, where do we go from here? What do we do?
I'm still riding that high. I'm not going to lie. Didn't mean to rhyme. But man.
That was cute.
Wasn't that nice? Jake, we have a fun next few months. But before we get into the next months, we got a fun episode today. Special guests coming up.
Indeed.
And we get to talk all things Los Angeles Chargers draft, the coach, you name it. Guess who we get to talk to today, Jake?
I'm quivering in anticipation.
Ooh, me too. My cat, Lavender. She'll probably make an entrance at some point. But no.
That's great. I'm sure she has a strong opinion on the Chargers draft picks.
I hope she does. I've raised her well. But no, in all seriousness, when we come back, we are going to be joined by the one and only Matt Money Smith, your voice of the Los Angeles Chargers, coming up next on Chargers Unleashed. Well, without any further ado, Jake, let's go ahead and bring in our special guest, the one and only Matt Money Smith. He is the voice of the Los Angeles Chargers. You can find him at Matt Money Smith. Matt, thank you so much for joining Chargers Unleashed. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's happening, Jake? What's happening, Dan? How's everything?
Hanging in there, man. Hanging in there. Doing well.
Everything is good. After that draft haul they got, I am sitting mighty fine. Not going to lie. Now, we're going to get into all kinds of stuff, but before we get into what we're going to do in the agenda, the Chargers got an absolute haul. I know we're still coming down from the rush, Matt. What would you say is your feeling as you've kind of gotten through what has been a crazy last couple months?
I don't think it could have, it just broke perfectly for the Chargers, right? It really reminds me, and I think it's probably an important lesson to remember is, I remember sitting there when both Terrell Edmunds and Derwin James were on the board when the Bills were on the clock right before the Chargers picked. And it was like, wow, they're going to get one of these two players. What a freaking boon. And when it was Derwin, which is what I think most of us had hoped it was going to be, we were jacked, and look what happened. The guy was an all-pro his rookie season. But of course, since then, he's had to deal with some injuries. We're hoping he's healthy and he's back this year. So I think, all that excitement packed into that first season, they go 12-4, they win a playoff game. And then of course it gets derailed a little bit. So you just kind of never know with the draft, and what the long haul is going to look like. But, coming out of that draft, it felt pretty darn good. And also when you look at the rest of that draft, right, of there was some good, there was some not so good. So it's kind of one of those, I think it's always important to try to keep some perspective that, look, very, very rare is a class of 7 if you have one pick in every round or more or less, impact players. Some of the guys are going to make it. Some of the guys are going to be better than you thought. Some of the guys aren't going to make it. So I think it's, while I am very excited about the way the draft broke and the fact that Slater and Samuel slid to them in the first and second rounds, they didn't have to sacrifice any capital to get them. I think it's also, again, you want to try to stay grounded and realize these are young men that performed at a level that is considerably lesser, no matter how good the competition was they faced, than what the NFL is going to throw at them in this first and then the upcoming seasons.
Now, it's hard to not be excited about what happened this past NFL draft. And we're going to get into all kinds of topics. We're going to be talking about Brandon Staley. We're going to be talking about the newest additions to the team, the offseason as a whole. But before we get into any of that, just kind of taking a step back, the Chargers have gone through, it seems like, so much change in this offseason. They've gone through new coaching staff. They've gone through a complete overhaul in the offensive line. They've gotten folks come into free agency. Folks have left. I don't think I have seen a team that has this much change and turnover, both in terms of personnel and coaching, top to bottom, since I've covered the team. What are your thoughts on just kind of the overall success or just what this coaching staff and Telesco has done this offseason?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. You're going to see a lot of change just because you're bringing in new systems. I think the way that Brandon Staley wants to play defense is probably going to look a lot different than the way Gus played defense. So you're talking about a new system on that side of the ball. I think, Anthony Lynn as a head coach, whether it was with Coach Wiz or Shane Steichen as the OC, he wanted to be a run-heavy team and ran a pretty conservative offense. Now, Shane was able to loosen it up a little bit. Or I should say open it up a little bit last year with Herbert, start pushing the ball downfield a little bit more than we were used to. But I think there were still those moments where you kind of saw the identity being reflected in the image of Anthony Lynn. So I think with, kind of what Coach Staley wants to do with Joe Lombardi, I think you're going to see a considerably different offense as well. Also, to me, the biggest change is the offensive line. They're going to go from arguably the worst unit in the NFL. Even if the jump is from league worst to league average, that is just a massive leap with that particular position group. And the fact that they were able to remake essentially 4/5 of their line, and you would even argue, let's say Balaga stays healthy this year, all 5 of those spots and get an upgrade at every single one, to not take a step back at any of them is just it's mammoth in terms of what it could mean for Justin Herbert, as maybe some teams have found some trends or some things they can exploit going into his second year after seeing him for maybe just the first time and not have, the so-called book, if it's out on Herbert. Being able to upgrade that particular unit, I think is going to pay massive dividends.
And speaking of that, of all the change that we've seen, I know we talked about the players, you talked about the coaching staff, but Brandon Staley in particular, I feel like he has kind of injected so much energy into this entire organization. And you could feel it from all the way from the players to the coaching staff down to the individual fans or the people covering the team, where every news conference seems like must-see television, whereas I don't necessarily think that was the case before. In terms of Brandon Staley, or maybe it's just a player, what do you think is the biggest change that has happened that has affected this team so far?
Well, yeah, it's Staley, and look, I think in the case of Coach Lynn, I really like Coach Lynn. He's just an awesome guy. The players absolutely loved him. And, I think for him, it was more of a, speak softly and kind of share things with your players more so than the media. He really was a player's coach. And they fought their asses off for him. And I think you saw that starting out 0-4 and how they fought to the end. I think you saw that last year, winning the final 4 games of the season, that those players were willing to fight for him. Now, I think Brandon Staley is kind of more of this. I think he saw, and I still think he's very true to himself. I think that is what you see is what you get. He is a football freak, a junkie, eats, sleeps, and breathes it. But I think you see some of those Sean McVay qualities in him, right? Where he gets really geeked to talk about football, to talk about the X's and O's, to share his passions. And I think that goes over really well with the media because it gives us stuff to latch onto, whereas Anthony Lynn was a little more reserved and didn't really share a lot. Staley's an open book, and he's excited to share stuff with you about what gets him excited about football. And understandably, we love that. It's great for us. It gives us great content. And look, I think he is a brilliant football coach. I really do. And that just, look, when you go Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, and you're coaching defense, and in Chicago, Khalil Mack is singing your praises, and in Denver, Von Miller is singing your praises, and in Los Angeles, Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald are singing your praises. Okay, that's enough for me. I'm sold. You might be a first-time head coach in your late 30s, but when you've got 5 of the best players in the league talking about, how much they believe in you and your system, that's darn exciting And especially when the guy comes from an offensive background, right? A college quarterback, and somebody that knows offense. And I think, and we'll get into it later, but I think that's something I really appreciate with the way they've approached a lot of this and how they drafted players and how they're going to approach coaching this team. I really like the way and the philosophy that Brandon Staley has brought. And I believe it's equal part of Tom Telesco when it comes to team building and trying to get the best players available for you every Sunday.
We're talking to Matt Money Smith, your voice of the Los Angeles Chargers on Sunday. Matt, switching back to the draft a little bit, I know you kind of already alluded to it in the intro, but just as far as the overall emotions, you had mentioned it with the good comparison with the Terrell Edmonds and Derwin James scenario. But as it was creeping closer and closer, we're going through the first 12 picks. Dan and I were going through this. We were actually standing right next to each other, and the emotion was palpable because we knew who was falling to us. And so we see Slater falling, and the Chargers were on the clock at 13. Kind of just give me just that rush of, maybe starting around pick 9 when the Broncos were on the clock, and what you were feeling at that point in time.
Yeah, I think for me, it started at 8 with the Panthers when they opted to go J.C. Horn instead of quarterback. And honestly, for me, it was less excitement and more like, you got to get a quarterback off here. Like if you don't get, I thought they needed to get 2 of the quarterbacks to go in order to get once Horn went, I was like, all right, because to me it seemed like, and look, again, I said this on Chris Hayre's pod for the Chargers, and I'll say it again here, like, it just, in all the people that I talked to, there was this pack of players that they felt like, there was a little gap after them. And so if they could get, one of the big 4 pass catchers, Pitts, Smith, Waddle, or Chase, one of the 2 offensive linemen, Slater or Sewell, or one of the 2 corners, Horn or Surtain, that was going to be a big get for them. But it basically meant you had to get 5 quarterbacks go off the board. And, once the Panthers passed on Fields, I was like, oh boy, this really could break bad. And Fields and Mac Jones could end up slipping behind him. And now maybe they're reaching on O-line, or maybe they're reaching on corner, or maybe they're going to go best of it. I didn't quite see how it was going to come together. But then once the Bears traded up, once the Broncos took Surtain, that's when I was like, okay, that's also terrible. And then we saw that, because I had heard the Philadelphia Eagles were way into Devontae Smith, and they had assumed he was. So I knew there was no chance the Chargers were going to get him, because I knew if he was at 12, he was going to Philly. That was one thing I was certain of. I was certain the Cowboys were going to take a corner. So when both of them were off the board, that's when I was trying to figure out, all right, is Tom Telesco going to trade up with the Cowboys? Because I'm sure, Rick Spielman's going to trade up for the Vikings to get Slater as he's sliding. He's going to get in there ahead of the Chargers to get, that tackle. And somehow, some way, Micah Parsons ends up going to the Cowboys, and that's the one thing that I did not account for. And once that happened, I was pretty excited. But so it took me all the way to make a long answer longer. It took me all the way to when the Cowboys selected Micah Parsons to really kind of say, wow, this really broke well for them. And, working with DJ and having the amount of respect I have for him when it comes to his evaluations, his number 1 offensive tackle in the draft to be there at the Chargers at 13 in a position of need really was a heck of a gift.
And real quick, was there any question in your mind when they got to 13 that it was going to be Slater?
None. What I believed they were going to do, and I don't think this was very a popular opinion, but or I should say a very well-known opinion, but Elijah Vera Tucker was way up there. So I think if it was, so I felt pretty good. I was like, you know what, if they don't get Slater, they're going to get Vera Tucker. And I think he could easily play left tackle, but he'll end up being an all-pro guard. So I think that's what they would have done. I think all these people that were projecting Darrisaw, they don't realize there was a pretty good gap between Darrisaw and the other tackles. On almost every, kind of everyone I talked to, that's kind of how it was slated. But so many of them thought Vera Tucker, like they basically said, look, if Vera Tucker had measured with over 33-inch arms, he very well could have been the first O-lineman pick. That's how much respect people had for his athletic ability, his versatility, and just his production. So I was like, you know what, they're going to get a great O-lineman. But I think that's the direction they would have gone.
We talked about it leading up to the draft, and I know a lot of people did just in general, about how big the holes were that the Chargers needed to fill at left tackle and at corner in this draft, especially after, you let Casey Hayward go in free agency, as you had alluded to. You obviously had revamped your entire offensive line just minus the left tackle position, so you knew that was going to be a big target. We talked about it as a pipe dream, and that there was absolutely no shot of a scenario where the Chargers end up with Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. in this draft. Was there a better possible outcome than what the Chargers ended up with in the first 2 rounds?
I mean, well, I guess to be a smart ass, you could say, well, yeah, I could have got Kyle Pitts at 13, an unguardable weapon or a unicorn, and somehow, whatever, JC Horn slides to the second. Yeah, but yeah, I get what you're saying. So, no, I don't think there is a better outcome based on where they were picking, not having to sacrifice any draft capital to be able to keep all 9 of their picks and just stick and pick and to come out with those 2. And I was, again, when I say I was high, this has nothing to do with my personal evaluation. This is just from what I was hearing, that Asante Samuel, if he were 6'1" instead of 5'10", would have been the first corner off the board. That's the talent he has. So once you can kind of get over we don't like to draft corners that are under 6 foot. And when you watch him play when you watch him play against big receivers, quick receivers, great route running receivers, outside slot, you recognize this guy's instincts and talent are undeniable. Yeah, that's exciting. He's not going to be a slot corner. I firmly believe he's going to be able, Brandon Staley's going to figure out, and especially just kind of the way he plays, because he does that, for people that don't know the way Staley coaches, with the Rams, they play everything, a ton of zone. They're the most zone, heavy defense of any team in the league, but all those zones have so many variation. They'll play quarters, they'll play cover 3, cover 1, cover 2. They'll do it all. And so I think the versatility that Samuel brings is going to be such a great get for this team because of where he can, you saw him do it with Ramsey last year. The best corner in the league is playing in the slot. He's playing safety in some cases, playing outside. So I think Staley probably looked at all of these corners and saw Samuel and said, man, that's a guy, that's a Swiss Army knife. That's the queen on the chessboard that I could really have some fun with. And I think when you pair that, that's the thing is I think it's also important to remember it's not just one player, right? It's how does this player fit in the context of the rest of the players? So when you think about the versatility of Nas, who some thought might end up getting moved to slot corner, that he's got that sort of ability. When you think about Derwin James, who I don't think any of us would be surprised if he played corner. I mean, gosh, we used to see those reps against Keenan in practice, right? And just how ridiculous he looked at that size and that speed ability. So I think just being able to move Derwin, Asante, Chris Harris, who can play in or out, and Nas around, man, that is exciting for this defense moving forward.
Quick tangent, just based off of, I know how big of a surfing enthusiast you are. You've even asked Tom about it. I think his last press conference before the actual draft, just as far as about the surfboard, is it a proven now, especially after this draft, that the surfboard in the draft room is indeed like the lucky charm?
I mean, that's up to them, right? I just brought it up because, Tom and I had talked about it before. And so I was on that presser and thankfully he was excited about it and got into it. So I think so. I mean, it's 2 for 2, well, we don't know. Who knows, again, what these guys are going to turn out to look like. But certainly the way the draft broke, it feels like you're going to want to have that surfboard around. And as I said on the video, if people saw it that the Chargers posted there on Twitter and Instagram, surfing franchise a record. So
yes.
Gotta have that in the war room, I think, every year now moving forward, because it looks so darn good. It's such a beautiful board. Rusty did a hell of a job shaping and putting that thing together for Tom. So I'd love to see it back in there next year.
Fully agree. Now, there was an expectation that the Chargers could target a wide receiver in this draft. The team goes out and gets a polished route runner and a big body Josh Palmer out of Tennessee in the 3rd round, who balled out in the SEC against premier talent, Patrick Surtain, who's now in Denver. How do you see him fitting in with this wide receiver room, and where do you see him making the biggest impact?
Well, I think there's, I think what people forget is you're not drafting for 2021. you're drafting for the long haul, right? You want these players to be drafted, developed, and signed long term and turned into all pro talent. So I think when you look at Josh, you see a little bit of each of the 1 and the 2, or whatever you want to call them, for the Chargers when it comes to Keenan and Mike. Keenan, of course, was just signed to a long-term extension. I don't expect him to play anywhere but the Chargers for his career, and I think he's on track to potentially go to the Hall of Fame, especially if Justin Herbert continues to progress and these guys can actually start winning at a very high level. Just good amount. Mike Williams, of course, had his 5th option picked up. Had to figure out a long-term extension with him. But so I think there's some, let's say Mike balls out and has a monster season. You can't pay everyone. I think Josh Palmer has those long arms, those 33-inch arms. He has the big hands. He has the 50-50 turns into 70-30 when he's jumping for the ball ability, that if they can't afford Mike, he can replace, that's someone you can see taking over at that spot moving forward. As a third receiver, look, you just want great pass catchers out there. His speed is plenty good enough. It's 4.5 is way fast in the NFL. You don't need 4.3, 4.2. Is it great to have? No question. But if you're an exceptional route runner, as we've seen with Keenan, who's a 4.7 guy on his pro day, you can get a lot faster on the field. Your GPS data is going to be considerably better than someone that can run a 4.3 in a straight line, but has no skill whatsoever to break in and out, get in and out of your breaks violently like Keenan's able to do, and not miss a beat doing it. So I do think look, I've heard some really great things about Palmer. I'm going to be honest. I was not that up to speed on him. I was kind of excited about the prospect of maybe picking up Amon-Ra St. Brown as that third receiver, just being a solid, just some of the best hands in the draft, knack for making the big play when it had to be play, an awesome third down receiver instead of feeling like you got to lock in on Keenan all the time, to find that other sort of outlet that you have confidence in. But I think Josh has shown in his career that he has that capability as well. When you see some of the toe taps, some of the 50-50 grabs, eating the Doritos off an opponent's head, that's there. So I do think he's going to fit in really well with this team.
I'm using that one. Doritos off the opponent's head. I'm going to hold that in my back pocket.
Nick Hardwick. That's a Marty Schottenheimer term. Nick said that I was a Martyism when he was playing for Marty way back in the day. So I got to give credit where credit's due.
I love that. Now heading into day 3, so Josh Palmer's picked, McKitty's picked. We go into day 3. I think there are a lot of people expecting, okay, this is a time where we got to go safety. Instead, they go defensive end with my boy, who we've coined Diamond in the Rump, with Chris Rump. And then after that, we go with both a running back as well as a linebacker in round 6. And then finally, in round 7, we go with our second Georgia player off the board with Mark Webb. Now, overall, it seems like this team has really put a focus on just making sure they cover that underbelly and the depth of this team.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Rump and you think about last year. I'm calling games with Joe Gaziano and Lamagna out there. Nothing against them, but and that's been the case. I mean, Melvin Ingram missed almost the entire season. Chenna got banged up. Joey Bosa's been banged up. A game or two in almost every season. Obviously with the foot, took a while for him to come back there. So you need depth. You have to have pass rushers. You got to have. I know. I think Daniel said this on the air when they took, I think it was when they took Rump. He said, look, Tom comes from the Bill Polian school of front office, and that is pass rushers and playmakers. And, your life and your defense, your defensive life changes dramatically if you cannot rush the passer. So it doesn't surprise me that in that 4th, they went after Rump. Because, when you think about it, beyond Chenna and Joey, and they signed Fackrell, so they got some depth there. But I think it's so important to have serious depth at that position. And there could still be free agent signings. There's still players out there, and I think that's kind of like that's a lesson to learn for and when I was kind of engaging and getting after some of these guys that were like, you got to draft a left tackle, Well, look, Charles Leno's out there now. It's inexplicable that the Bears cut him. I don't understand that. He's a good offensive line. He's a good left tackle. Is he exceptional? No, he's not a top 5 guy, but you know what? That's a top 15 guy. And he's out there now. Someone's going to sign Charles Leno and get a solid average left tackle. Like, these guys become available. So I think that's something that's always important to kind of remember. And so just in the case of Rump, like, as opposed to a safety, do they need a safety right now? Probably. They could use some depth at that position, but that may not be the case in 2 months. That might not be the case in 2 years. If they believe in Rump, the pass rusher, and Rump, the character, and just building depth there, who's to say, Chen is going to sign an extension after this year and even be on the team? Again, you got to think that, like, it's so important for people to keep an eye. This isn't 2021. This is multiple years and multiple, kind of signings, drafts that are going to continue to build and replenish and fortify each of these position groups.
Now, there's a lot of excitement, and I think you saw in the draft room, I think you heard stories of, in the draft room for first pick, you saw Justin Herbert there with the fist bumps, and then second round, you heard Derwin James all excited, lobbying for Asante Samuel Jr. Of all of the players on this team currently who have been here since this past year, who do you think is the most excited for how we ended up hauling in these 9 picks?
Well, I think you just said it. I mean, that's it. That's the answer. It's Justin Herbert. He got his left tackle. He got a wide receiver, and it's Derwin James, because Derwin loves Florida State guys, and he's got a lot of juice. So I don't think there's any question that it's those 2 guys. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, right? Herb's going to be protected, and Derwin is going to have an addition to the secondary that he absolutely loves, because he's still so invested in Florida State football. And look, beyond that, Asante Samuel is just a ridiculously talented corner. So, yeah, I think you answered it. It's Herbert on offense and it's Derwin on defense.
Didn't mean to spoil that for you. Sorry, Matt.
That's all right. Listen,
way to bury the lead there, Dan.
That's it. Sometimes the host wants to show everybody that he knows something about football too, and you end up answering your own question.
Nailed it.
It's okay. It's all good.
So, Matt, you just were talking about it actually a second ago, and talking about, between now and the start of the season, there's a lot of guys who become available. And as you had mentioned, did the Chargers necessarily need a safety right now? Probably. But if you were to just look at it, maybe it is the safety position. But if we're just talking about it in a macro sense, as far as, is there any glaring weaknesses? I know we have kind of our starters on paper, but is there any other position that you feel that Tom Telesco could go out and improve this team at a certain position before week 1?
I mean, it's not sexy, but I think it's obvious to me. It's special teams. I want to see a full-fledged kicking and punting competition. I want to find out if it was Ty Long and Michael Badgley, or was it the guys up front? Was it the special teams players? I think it's so important, to upgrade that unit. Special teams needs a dramatic change and upgrade and infusion of talent. And I think that's why you saw the players that they drafted. I think that back end, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. I think every one of those players is going to make a considerable contribution on special teams, and they really needed to fortify those ranks. So for me, it's keeping an eye on who's getting cut, because a lot of teams don't want to spend money on kicker and punter for the most part. You got to have a Justin Tucker to really be willing to sink money into that position, because every dollar counts. Against the salary cap in this league. So. To me, that's what I'll be keeping an eye on. And I think it's, I'm not saying that it can't be Ty Long and Michael Badgley. I just want to make sure that it wasn't them, that the missed field goals from Badgley, because there were a couple bad ones. The Saints, of course, comes to mind. That's a game is won. The pitch and catch from Herbert to Mike Williams was set up. It's indoors. There's no fans. There's no conditions whatsoever. All you got to do is bang a 50-yarder, which every kicker should be able to do in this league, and he missed it. And we saw him miss a lot of big field goals over 40 yards, and that just can't happen again. So I think I want to see a kicking competition. And, Ty Long had some of the worst numbers when it comes to punters, if not the worst numbers when it comes to punters in the NFL. So I just think it's important to identify, was it your specialists or was it your special teams? So I think that's something that I would certainly like to see a legitimate competition come training camp.
Now, there could be 10 million answers to this question, Matt, but we haven't even seen these guys take a snap yet, and this new team under this new coaching staff. But for you, what would be one thing that you would say that you're most excited about heading into this 2021 season with this team?
Oh, I think it's, look, I think it's obvious, right? It's Herbert. It's the idea that he put together the greatest, rookie season of a quarterback in the history of the NFL. And he did it, on a team that was regularly beat to hell, did not have a full complement of his weapons, played a damn tough schedule, and led 5 times in the fourth quarter and lost those games, mostly because of the defense. Those are 5 leads in the fourth quarter, some in the final 5 minutes, that the defense gave up. So I'm excited to see if he can do it again. I comes to Baker Mayfield, and then Baker had that sophomore slump. And I think that's why it was so important that offensive line got upgraded, right? As Baker was playing behind a terrible offensive line with bad coaching in his second season. So the fact that I feel like he's got a great coaching staff and an incredibly upgraded offensive line is awfully exciting to see if he can build on this. If teams that have an entire offseason, particularly his division foes, to find out, okay, let's pick this thing apart. Let's figure out what his weaknesses are. Because look, he had 2 really bad games, right? The Dolphins and the Patriots. And he just did not perform well. So I'm sure every single team is going to look at that film and figure out, what did Brian Flores, what did Bill Belichick do on defense to neutralize what otherwise was just, again, the greatest rookie season by a quarterback ever. And that's what they're going to throw at him. So I think it's just him taking that next step and figuring out, again, for Justin as well, and for his coaches, what went wrong in those 2 games that we can fix and make sure does not happen in 2021.
Well, we are off to an incredible start of the 2021 season. We've had an insane amount of excitement around the draft, free agency, and now we've had Matt Money Smith on Chargers Unleashed. Man, I don't think we can get any better from here, Jake.
You probably could. You could probably get a lot better from here, but it's not a bad start, Dan.
That's not a bad start. Matt, what do you got going on these next few weeks? You're going to be able to kind of chill, take a couple of sessions out on the water, do some surfing. What do you got planned?
Yep, always going to do that. But we got I think I got power rankings next week. We're doing post-draft power rankings on NFL Network. And of course, still doing a radio show every single day like I have for the last, 30 years, 25, not that long, 25 years or whatever. So, with Petros and Money every single day. Excited about doing that. But yeah, and on NFL Network, I think it's what's today? So it's a week from today. We'll do power rankings on NFL Network post draft. So nice. Still staying busy. The NFL enjoys. You got nothing going on. You're just chilling, right? That's it, man. Hanging out.
Well, hey, Matt, thank you so much. You can find Matt Money Smith on Twitter at Matt Money Smith, on Instagram, Real Matt Money Smith. You can find him with Petros and Money. You can find him on NFL Network. You can find him literally everywhere. And then in the future, you'll find him on Sundays with Daniel Jeremiah calling games for these Chargers. Matt, thank you so much for joining Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you soon, all right? Don't be a stranger.
No, not at all. Anytime. I always appreciate it. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
All right, guys.
Matt Money Smith, ladies and gentlemen, always a treat having him on the show. That's our second time having him on the show, Dan, and he does not disappoint one bit. Lot to actually unpack there from some of the stuff that he said, as far as, his indications that he even didn't think that the Chargers were going to draft Rashawn Slater when he was on the clock. I really loved his analogy about Asante Samuel Jr. It kind of ties into my whole size be damned concept, because I truly believe that his skill set was first round caliber.
CB1.
And if he was 6'1", if he was the size of a Patrick Surtain with his skill set, that he was bold enough to make that statement that Asante Samuel Jr. could have been cornerback 1 off the board. I mean, that is bold. So, Dan, just your quick thoughts. What did you take away from that?
Quick thoughts, Doritos off the helmet. I am using that all the time. I loved that quote. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Marty. No, it was kind of interesting. So I remember how you were, Jake, and you were sweating bullets when we actually got to 13 on please Chargers do the right thing.
I didn't even have, like I said, I had, what did I say on Monday? 10%?
Yeah, I think you said 5% faith or something like that.
10%. I think I said 10% faith, but still, it's just.
It was 100%. And then you talked to Matt, and he was, once we got to 13 and he knew that Slater was available, he was 100% certain. And so, it's interesting hearing what people say now. If Slater wasn't there, I think it would have been a whole different ballgame, where it was going to be a Vera Tucker or maybe go Darisaw, who knows. But it was interesting to see how confident he was when we actually got to 13 and Slater was available. No brainer. And same thing for second round too. I think second round, everyone knew, at least everyone was hoping and pleading that we were going to go Asante Samuel Jr. in round 2. But it's interesting that Matt was the same way. He's like, there's no way we can't go this way.
No. And you know this, Dan. Again, as you mentioned, I felt the exact same way when the second round pick came along and Asante Samuel Jr. sitting there. And again, please don't ever use Hank Bauer to announce a draft pick ever again.
A heart attack. God.
I mean, pause for effect. I get it. You made it more dramatic. That's fine. Give yourself, a nice, quick little photo op while you look out into the crowd with your little card and
check your phone for the weather app.
Right.
You can see how your stocks are doing.
I don't think Hank Bauer actually realizes how many heart palpitations that he caused across Chargers Nation in that short period of time. But still, I had the same feeling as I had the day before. I still did not have the confidence that we were going to do exactly that, which is why I called this whole scenario a pipe dream. Not for the fact of that the guys wouldn't, not necessarily, I mean, did I think that the guys were going to be on the board? Maybe at least one of them. But to get them both and then to have your organization actually pull the trigger and make the right decision, dude, this is the ultimate pipe dream.
Mm-hmm. And he talked about, the other thing I thought was interesting was he talked about how he didn't see much film on Josh Palmer prior to us picking him and seeing how excited he is about that pick now. I think that's kind of most of Chargers fandom. They didn't really know who he was, and all of a sudden you listen to Brandon Staley talk about him, you see what he did against the SEC competition, you're like, oh, I could see it. And then you start looking at his potential, you're like, wow, this is a good pick, and this is definitely a pick for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that we forget about sometimes. And we get so pigeonholed as the draft goes along because, Dan, you've always said it. It's just like, okay, we shouldn't be drafting for a need. We should be going for BPA. And however you want to, determine what order and what priority you want to rank your board, and everybody's board's different. Your and I's board's different. Anybody's board aside is much different than what the Chargers is in their war room. But Tom Telesco even said it prior to the draft. He said, he said it on, I think he said it both prior and post draft, where he says, we don't draft for position. We draft the players. And much like it was with the Kenneth Murray last year and that pick, a lot of people were, I think Popper had said it. Don't be surprised if the Chargers go after a linebacker that year. I don't think that we expected it to actually happen that early, but look at the moves that then came forth the following year. So I think, again, as Matt alluded to, this is a for the future type of pick, not just for this year. And you could actually say that with a number of the picks that the Chargers took, whether it's in round 3 or beyond. You have to look at it that way. And so, yeah, it's not just, shoring up some depth on the back end of your roster. As he had said, with the players from rounds 4 to 7, you're shoring up special needs or special teams, but these are also guys that could eventually earn some legitimate starting time.
Yeah, this was a fun one. And I think the thing that I love about talking with Matt is you can tell how much he knows and how invested he is in this team and how many people he knows in the organization, because the stuff he talks about, we haven't heard how hyped everybody was for Vera Tucker. There's a lot of people outside that were thinking about it. You yourself were high on him, but you didn't hear folks inside the Chargers organization high on him as well. And so you hear about kind of like the overall, that big board that he talked about, where it's like the 2 corners, the 2 offensive linemen. He talked about there being Waddle, Pitts. The fact that the Chargers were able to get out of round 1 with arguably probably their either second or third best option at all, it's just insane. And the Chargers did it. They went back round 2, did it again. And I got to say, I don't know about you, Jake, but this feels to me, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is this the best draft overall that you have seen the Chargers since you've covered or been a fan of the team?
This is tough. It's damn close. I go back and I start thinking of, because you just can't think of the first round picks. It'd be easy to say, no, when Derwin James fell to us, but then start thinking beyond that. I don't think that it equates to this. I even remember how excited I was when the Chargers were able to pick up Forrest Lamp in the second round, when his value at that point in time was through the roof. And so many people were surprised that he was still on the board in round 2. Obviously, that didn't end up panning out. But
Nasir Adderley year, when we got him around 2,
Jerry Tillery and Nasir Adderley year, that was pretty good. That's the only 1-2 punch that I could actually remember being, that at the time, all the tea leaves just were pointing towards both of those guys and being the natural fits. Now, we'll obviously, time will tell on that. I don't think that Tillery's hit his full potential, but he's growing. We haven't really gotten a fair shot to see what Nasir Adderley is going to do. And especially when the moment we've all been waiting for, to pair him next to Derwin James, we still haven't seen it yet. So I would probably say that may be the close second, but this one by far, just given the fact that, Jerry Tillery was probably still going to be on the board around that point in time for the Chargers drafting. Nasir Adderley was more of a possibility of him being on the board in the second round when the Chargers were drafting. Not 100%, but that was where they were actually projected. Rashawn Slater, in my mind, should have gone in the top 10. He should have been off the board. If the Chargers had any chance at getting either him or Penei Sewell, they should have had to have given away draft capital for it. Yeah. Asante Samuel, to me,
a top 8 pick for sure. Asante Samuel Jr. is a first round talent.
Right. He was a first round talent. And even so, even when we're going into the second round, I thought to myself, okay, there are still teams that have a dire need at corner. And again, we saw it. The first pick off the second round was Tyson Campbell. And so I'm like, oh God, here we go. It's like, we're already starting with a corner. That's just going to, shrink down the players to us right there. And I thought the last team leading up to that was Dallas, because I knew Dallas, who was mocked for months, that was going to be taking Patrick Surtain with their first round pick. They passed. They traded back. They took Mekhi Parsons. I thought for sure that Dallas was going to go Asante Samuel, and they didn't. And it's just the chances of this happening was just so low. So when you exactly. So when you put all that together, yeah, it has a good argument to possibly be the best 1-2 punch that the Chargers have had in the draft in a long time. A long time.
I remember back with it was a Drew Brees year, like when we got Drew Brees.
I was just thinking of that.
Merriman, I think that's when we also who's the kicker we got? Was it Kading?
Well, because wasn't it? Well, LT was the first round pick, and then Drew Brees came around in the second.
Yep. And then when was the pick for? Oh, I'm thinking Merriman was Rivers one. I'm sorry,
that was off the Rivers Manning trade.
That's right. Okay, so it was for that one. It was Rivers. It was Merriman, and who was the kicker? Was it Kading?
You got Kading out of that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I mean, I can't think of a more successful draft at the top with guys who you did not think you'd be able to get than this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's just bonkers. So no, this is a fun episode. It's a fun conversation with Matt. Anything that surprised you?
Anything that surprised me? Probably just his feeling towards Rashawn Slater. I mean, even Rashawn Slater said it on Colin Cowherd that he had no prior conversations with the Chargers.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, and that's not the first time that's ever happened. That the Chargers haven't talked to him, but normally you're able to put those things together. I mean, if you go to the flip side, Asante Samuel Jr., they met virtually with Asante Samuel Jr. multiple times. So you knew that the interest was really heavy there. But for Rashawn Slater, they hadn't even met with him, maybe because the Chargers didn't even expect him to fall to 13th. They probably figured that he was going to be gone. That may have been one of the reasons. I don't know. But I think it's just the feeling, even when you get that close, even for Matt to say something like that he wasn't even 100% sure that it was going to be Slater at 13, that it may have been Elijah Vera Tucker. So it's just it was a little bit surprising to me that as close as he is in the organization, that at that point in time, his feelings were virtually the same as yours and I, as far as I don't know what's going to happen. Just hold your breath and find out.
Yep. No, it was man, that was a wild ride. And I feel like I'm still kind of coming down from the anxiety of that. And, we just found out today, we found out all the numbers that these guys are getting. I mean, this is real life. Like, these guys are Chargers.
Well, yeah, they're not cheerleaders.
So I guess technically they haven't signed. So who knows? Who knows? I'm just hoping, honestly, that we can get our jerseys faster than last year. Last year, when Justin Herbert and Kenneth Murray were signed, it took I want to say 6 months before the jerseys were able to get back because I think there was some production issues because of COVID. But man, that took forever. I have a feeling this one's going to be a little bit faster.
I think you'll be just fine. Don't worry. I know you have jersey separation anxiety. So
I do. JSA, that's what they call it.
Yeah. You have a severe case of JSA.
Yes. All right, Jake, take us home. Take us home for the next episode.
Well, I mean, this was just a fantastic episode, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But as far as just the guests that we have lined up for these next couple of weeks are nothing short of spectacular. And this is the period of time where you come off such a high on the draft, and then you're going to have to do some waiting and waiting and waiting. I mean, I know we've got mini camp starting. We're eventually going to get into OTAs. Finally see these guys out in pads out on the field, which would be nice. But between now and then, outside of some, outside transactions or whatnot, things are going to be quiet on the Western Front for a while. So we're going to do our best to fill that time. We've got some great guests lined up over the next couple of weeks, and it's going to be fantastic. Dan and I are really excited to have these individuals on the show. And of course, bring them to you as well. So want to shout out to our sponsors again, Garrison Brothers, Charters Bolt Family, Brewery X in Anaheim, and of course our new sponsor, Dan, Manscaped. Manscaped.
We're going to have a ball with that one, Jake. Ooh. See what
I did there? Yeah. Didn't think of that one.
Nope.
But again, oh yeah, very original, Dan. Optimistic and original. That should just be your phrase from now on. I'm optimistic and original, Dan Wolkenstein, for sure.
Thank you.
But continue to follow the show at LAC_Unleashed, myself at JT Hefner, and of course, Dan Wolkenstein at Chargers Homer. Thank you guys so much again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Chargers Unleashed.